Let's get started. We have a bit of time over the lunch hour, and I'd like to welcome you to today's address by past President Dr. David Kaplan on Who Are We? Redefining the Geographic Community. My name's Ken Foote. I'm kind of a long past president, and it's my honor to introduce Dave today. I was thinking that it really is wonderful to be here in Denver for this meeting, largely because we're in person again for the first time since 2019. The last meeting we had here in 2005, I think, was also notable, but it was because we had a blizzard at the end of the meeting. Some of you remember. But today we have much more pleasant weather, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce this keynote, both because I have such a high regard for Dave's accomplishments over a long career, but also because the topic of today's session is so close to my heart. This is because I believe, in the end, that our work as geographers, as scientists, as scholars, as citizens will be judged by how we can help address the great challenges of today's world and how we contribute to science, scholarship, industry, government, nonprofit organizations, and as citizens to our communities. And those are on a range of issues that are being addressed in the meetings this week. We can only make those contributions, though, if we are able to attract, mentor, and develop the talents of individuals now and long into the future. This is where Dave's concern for building the community of geography is critical to our future. Because building a community isn't just waiting for people to walk in the door here at this conference or back home where we work or study. It means reaching out widely to people from different countries, with different backgrounds, with different institutions, as well as overcoming arbitrary barriers that limit access by gender, sexuality, family status, age, nationality, ability, and all other qualities that are irrelevant to professional and intellectual life. The point is to enfranchise a wider range of geographers and open the discipline to a broader array of voices. Dave, I think, can speak to this issue from a career's worth of experience as a professor at Kent State and other universities, as past president of the AAG, as we know, counselor of the American Geographic Society, chair of the AAG's Healthy Departments Committee, and is editor of two leading journals, National Identities and the Geographical Review. His research on nationalism, borderlands, ethnic and racial segregation, urban and regional development, housing, finance, and sustainable transportation has been published in nearly 70 peer-reviewed articles, as well as in, gosh, by count, about a dozen books, textbooks, atlases that he's written, co-written, edited, and co-authored. But Dave also has a knack for building community himself, whether at Kent State, across the United States, or around the world, through the many students he has advised. I think it's 55 grad students as primary advisor and counting, hundreds of other students he's taught, and the collaborations he's fostered with colleagues all around the world. So with enough said, Dave, I look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you to everybody. I want to start by saying what an honor it was serving as president of the American Association of Geographers. Especially given where I was from, a non-flagship, non-land-grant university in Ohio, this was a position I never really expected to attain. I was flabbergasted when I was nominated and even more stunned when I was elected. It was and is the biggest honor of my life. Of course, the events of my presidential term were far from ideal. You may remember a little thing called COVID-19. I'm not sure if that's still something that's in the distant past or not. And it did upend the world, but most importantly for me, it meant that I had to deal with the first cancellation of an AAG meeting in over 70 years. I remember that day very well. In retrospect, it all makes sense now, but at the time it was really a scary decision. But even with COVID, my presidential term was incredibly fulfilling. My 8 months as president before the virus became widespread was a fantastic opportunity to meet with geographers all around the country, to work with the council on all these new initiatives, things like the International Council, which is in place right now, having undergraduate awards at regional meetings, and I just met somebody who had won one of these and was at his first regional meeting. More help to the regions in general, reconfiguring the national meeting, and so many other things. And it was also great to get to know the amazing AAG staff and to welcome a brand new executive director after some 20 years. And that would, of course, be Gary Langham, who has just come to his first in-person AAG meeting after being president for 3.5 years. Now, I would say this, giving a past presidential speech is really daunting. For one thing, it's called a past presidential speech, so it means that you have to say something. You have to say something that hasn't been said before, and something that reflects geography as a field of study and as a discipline. I myself knew the power of past presidential speeches from my time as a doctoral student, because I look back at a speech that was given by Glenn Trewartha, past president from I think the 1940s or 50s, who talked about the importance of population geography, and I used Glenn's work in my dissertation and in my first Annals article. Now, in thinking about this speech, I consulted what past presidents of the AAG had already said. Recent presidents have spoken eloquently about such topics as human rights, climate change, globalization, racial injustice. Some have focused on how best to position geography in the world through things like education, internationalization, storytelling, by fostering interdisciplinarity. Ken Foot's speech on the importance of building community resonated particularly strongly with me, which is why I asked Ken to introduce me. Fortunately, through the magic of YouTube, I was able to watch Ken's speech again, and I did, the whole thing. I thought that I could use this speech to, in part, expand and extend some of the things that Ken has already talked about. I'd also say that one of my most gratifying chores as president was to write those monthly columns. You know, it's sort of daunting at first to think about writing a monthly column, but it was a great opportunity to talk about geography as a community. And for me, the idea of geography as a community was up front and center. But the columns are also meant to be a warning of sorts. Now, I'm looking out at this wonderful audience, and thank you so much for coming here, because I know there's lots of other things that you could go to. But I would say this, we are at a complicated moment in the discipline of geography. There have been some trends which have not recently been in our favor. But I believe that community holds the answers. There is a strong and enduring relationship between geography and community. On one hand, communities are places, and geography is the discipline to study community as a place. Biogeographers study plant communities, whereas social geographers study communities of people as they operate in space and place. But geography itself is a community, an intellectual, social, and cultural community. Like Ken said in his presidential address 11 years ago, this is a community that must be built and expanded. Now, geography is among the disciplines most likely to study communities as places. This reflects our standing as a field most concerned about places and the denizens and activities within those places. Like so many of you, I became interested in geography because I wanted to know what was going on all these different dots that I could see on a map. The map was a kind of canvas which displayed all the possibilities to me, whether it was faraway countries on a world map or nearby towns and natural features on a local map. My interest in community was further sparked by some of the community studies literature, again marked by such classics as Middletown, Urban Villagers, Street Corner Society, Aikenfield, things like that. These studies truly dove into the dynamic interrelationships of people, nearly always contained within a singular space. Now, as a geographer, I came to appreciate the value of an approach which built upon the uniqueness of places, seeing each place as composed of unique sets of relationships. This so-called ideographic approach lost a lot of favor in the mid-20th century, especially with the desire of many geographers to develop universal spatial laws. But it regained respect as place again was put in the forefront during the 1980s and the 1990s. After all, what is place but a means by which to express how a singular location constitutes a specific combination of factors which cannot be replicated anywhere else. No one place is exactly like another. To live within a placed world is to experience all of these geographical distinctions. A placeless world, by contrast, has little to distinguish itself. Especially with globalization and technology, we might feel that we are living in a world that is increasingly placeless. Every place feels the same and there is no there. Placelessness connotes a lack of rootedness. People within such a landscape maybe don't have a sense of belonging. Well, one of the things we're doing at this meeting is commemorating a great geographer, Yi-Fu Tuan. And Yi-Fu Tuan began writing about place, and when he did, he incorporated the notion of a sense of place. In this regard, a person's attachment to place has to do with a web of experiences, of awarenesses, of emotions that are connected to that place. It's difficult to have a sense of place when none of these items are present. But for many people, the sense of place will come out of a personal connection to a place. So when we say rootedness, we mean that there's some sort of memory that's tying us to this location. It can be an everyday sort of memory, sort of the kind of memory you get from your daily shopping rounds in a place. Or it can be an intense memory of an activity that took place in a place that changed your life, such as the place where you may have met your future wife or your future husband. If no such memories exist, this may be a technical place, but there will be no sense of place. Now, how is it that place conflates with community? Certainly a community conjures up much warmer tones, sort of like calling a house a home. But there's some practical significations in this terminology. A place can be depopulated, whereas a community, at least in the social sense, is always composed of people. A place can be a static layering of attributes in one location, where a community suggests a dynamic interweaving of numerous lives working together. A place contains with it many different attributes, whereas a community is not a container but describes the interactions and interconnections between people. Place may be blandly neutral. Community never is. Community connotes a very distinct feeling. Being part of a community within a place is far different from simply residing within a place. And as geographers, we need to work on our engagements with our own local communities. Now, to that end, I'm especially heartened to see the development of the Community Geographies Collaborative. The focus of this new AAG group is to do community geography by working with people in places near and far. Now, I come from a place, Kent, Ohio, where the relationships between the university and the local community were shattered by the events of 1970, when National Guardsmen killed 4 students. Now, since I've lived in Kent some 28 years now, there has been a strong and mostly successful effort to re-knit these relationships and to partner with local residents and businesses. The result is a much better environment for all those who are involved. I invite you to come and see what we have done. The other broad sense of community begins as a group of people who share something in common. A social group could be any division of the population marked off by some social indicator. So for example, it could be defined by relative income. We could talk about those who live under the poverty line. They represent one group. We could talk about another group with incomes over $500,000 a year. They represent yet another group. We can create social groups out of any sort of criteria. Yet it would be hard-pressed to consider these social groups true communities. Simply describing a social group does not make it a community. People may be placed within categories, but have no sense of shared identity or a shared purpose. A community, on the other hand, consists of people engaged in a common cause, brought together by their common identity. No community can simply be imposed from the outside. Instead, community must be formed by the community members themselves. It can be based on a shared identity, a shared purpose, or in the simple and continued engagement of people over time, as in a group of colleagues or friends. Now, for community to occur, there has to be a sense of belonging with one another, some sort of interaction between those who belong to the group. A community of people who live in poverty can only exist if there is some sort of connection between them, perhaps motivated by a call to action. Otherwise, it's just individuals sharing an attribute. That doesn't mean that members of the community have to know each other individually. In fact, I study nations and nationalism, and nations are a great example of a large community composed of people who largely do not know each other, but who share a common identity, some sense of shared purpose, often accentuated by particular threats, and they share a sense of belonging. Now, community can be expressed in a relatively shallow way, but the true aspiration is that the community fulfills the deepest human desire, the desire not to be alone. It fulfills these psychological needs, guarding against a sense of alienation, of enemy. Now, beyond cultural, economic, or place-based interconnections and considerations, there are communities that can be defined by their practices. Such so-called communities of practice are groups of people who share a common concern or passion for something that they do and learn to do it better as they interact regularly. Now, this is what defines an academic community as well, especially one focused around a field of study. It distinguishes between a mere occupational category where there's no sense of shared purpose to a group fostered by dialogue, collaboration, and yes, conferences. Now, does it mean that everybody is engaging with everybody else all the time? Of course not. But it does mean that there is a sense of belonging bolstered by a true ecology of interconnections. If someone does not feel a part of that ecology, if they're drifting alone, then they do not feel like they are part of that community. Now, the importance of how geographers uncover community on the ground is accompanied by the significance of geography itself as a community. As geographers, we all have kind of a origin story for how we discovered geography. Perhaps for you, the fact that geography was a field of study was a revelation that you had in high school. More likely it happened later on, maybe in college or even after college in your 20s or 30s. Upon becoming a geographer, hopefully you understood that you were more than just in an academic discipline, that you were in fact in a community. Now, one of the advantages of finally knowing you're a geographer and studying or working with fellow geographers is the sense of community that you will get. Now, perhaps you are different from me, but I found that my love of geography was sometimes a lonely pursuit. Now, once I found a way of identifying it as a subject, it may have seemed a little odd, maybe a little out of step to others. People sometimes laughed at me. But when I found a community of geographers, I realized that we were all united by our appreciation for this wonderful discipline that arches across so many topics, but is always anchored in the devotion to space and place. These communities that we uncover provide a salve. They provide inspiration. For me, it began when I was a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin. I just started graduate school. There I was with about 60 grad students, and some of them are in the audience today, a couple of dozen who were new, just like me, and about 16 professors, all of whom were geographers. It was a remarkable thing. Now, it was later, during that year, that I came across a much larger community of geographers that was called the Association of American Geographers. We had a slightly different name then. It was also the first time I truly encountered a professional organization. I had never before traveled to a professional conference. It just wasn't common for us in college. So the first year, a whole bunch of us from the Department of Geography took one of those big old conversion vans, and about 15 of us drove it straight from Madison, Wisconsin to Washington, D.C. It was a long and smelly and tiring trip. I will tell you that. And then some people insisted on stopping to see rock formations and things like that. When I got to DC, I was overwhelmed. So many people, and they were all geographers. It was like a city of geographers occupying an entire hotel in the middle of Washington, D.C. Now, that was when about 2,700 people went to the annual convention. 2,700, about half of the total AAG membership at the time. At that time, it was about 75% men, all dressed up in suits and slacks and loud sport jackets and ties and all the other things. Well, that was it. There are now over 10,000 members, and this year about half of them, about 5,000 people, are at this annual meeting in person, with another 1,500 attending virtually. Before the pandemic, about 8,000 people routinely attended the national meeting, and we'll see what happens going forward. Beyond the size, the meeting is a little different now than it used to be. It's much more diverse, which is a good thing. It's especially more diverse in terms of the number of countries that are represented by the participants. There's greater but still too low members of historically underrepresented groups, and there's a much, much larger number of women in this conference than there were when I first started. And at least from my sartorially challenged perspective, it seems like most people dress up a little more casually now than they did back then. What has not changed is that this meeting, and all the geography meetings represent a vivid expression of the community of geography. A coming together of all these people working from their own quirky corners of the world into one large assembly of people. This is a strong thing. This is a positive thing. It's an important aspect that, in my opinion, defines our discipline in ways unique to all academic disciplines. Geographers operate as more than simply an academic group, a type of group defined by people who practice geography in some form or another. To a great extent, geographers also act as a community. This is a positive thing. This is a good thing. But it also may help us consider how we may deal with the very real threats that are being imposed on geography right now. As an American geographer, it's always surprising to talk to geographers from other countries, and I've had that experience many, many times. In most of these places, geography is a common field of study, something students are acquainted with from their very earliest years. Students can specialize in geography in high school, and afterwards many will go on to pursue geography in universities. Unlike in the United States, where geography is always called a discovery discipline, encountered late in a college career, sometimes the junior or senior year when people decide to become geographers. Elsewhere, geography is a topic that every student is familiar with. They may not major in it, but at least they know that it exists. Often students come into a university with a depth of geographical knowledge which would challenge almost any American. And everybody everywhere has some familiarity with geography as a distinct field of study. Unfortunately, that is not the case in the United States, as all American geographers are familiar with. Because of its heritage in the US, geography has always been a distinct underdog. Only 1% of all liberal arts majors specialize in geography. Before the advent of advanced placement human geography, very few secondary schools taught geography as a distinct subject. Even after high school, geography is found in only 1 out of every 10 colleges and universities in the United States. It's not very common in private universities, which make up a large and prestigious component of the US higher educational landscape. Now, there are a few private colleges that have solid geography departments, places like Middlebury or McAllister or Dartmouth and several others. But the number of doctoral programs in private universities is quite low. Clark, Syracuse, perhaps a few others with some geographical component. Even when considering geography in the United States, as primarily a public university endeavor, the landscape is still scattered and far from robust. Yes, most flagship state universities still carry geography programs, and geography is found in several other large public universities. Yet the disappearance of geography programs in universities has been disheartening. These days, we're hearing less about new startup programs and more about programs which are closing. Now, I could go down the list of geography departments which have closed in the last several years. In several cases, geography lives on there as a major or a minor in the specializations of some faculty. Other geography programs have not been so lucky. Some have been eliminated altogether. Some programs have been hobbled, with the crisis averted for the time being, but with declining faculty and growing administrative pressure. Massive system restructurings, such as what's happening in Pennsylvania, where 6 universities are being consolidated into 2, can have huge implications for those programs considered to be more marginal by the administration. Now, some of my own data and the data that's presented by the AAG in their State of Geography report shows a general growth in the number of geography majors from the 1980s to 2012 or so. But since then, since 2012, the number of geography majors has declined over 17% in just 10 years. The number of geography majors has declined by 17% in just 10 years. And I'll say this to you right now. I don't care. No matter what our research excellence is, our success in procuring funding, our prominence in public discussion, if geography loses its majors, the field as a whole is in peril. We simply cannot afford this. Now, if we see a declining major pool, the last thing we should do is to live with it. There is no fundamental reason why geography should not be a vital and growing discipline throughout the entire country. We teach students about the connections between human and natural worlds. We provide them with an exceptional skill base and the types of things that companies need. Done right, geography is a discipline which teaches literacy, numeracy, graphicacy. Students coming out of a geography program have learned the value of critical thinking with also enough applied knowledge to be valuable to any employer. Now let's face it, the recent pandemic and consequent closure of places and contexts has shown just how important these elements are in creating community and sustaining community. We did try to build virtual communities, and they've had some advantage in terms of accessibility and cost. I'm glad that these remain as an option. But for many, they have been a poor substitute for the need for physicality, for proximity, and of fostering our sense of belonging. The threat to geography made manifest in the closure of departments across the country and the dismantling of geography is a blow to our bonds of community. We need to think of ways to expand the community of geography, and we need to commit to implementing these strategies as much as is possible. Now, how do we get back to a position of growth, of vibrancy? I believe that it begins with a recognition of geography as a community, and in the rebuilding of the community of geography at two very distinct scales. Now, the first scale would be that of the discipline, represented specifically by the now named American Association of Geographers, but also by the American Geographical Society, the National Council on Geographical Education, and other groups charged with advancing geography as a whole. It's within these groups that we have to work to expand our community in tangible ways. Perhaps the main thrust of my interest in when I was president and even continuing these days is really in promoting what I consider to be more institutional diversity, more institutional inclusion. As president, I wrote a column on academic inequality. As we know, there is a privileged class of academics who reap many benefits, and I consider myself in that level of privilege, but we reap benefits of connections, of resources, often of smaller teaching loads. These are valued members of the association, but it's too easy to overlook geographers who do not have these positions. Smaller departments are vital. It's often these places that expend more time on undergraduates, that nurture them in their very earliest years, that bring them to their first conferences at regional meetings, and often share research experiences with them. Community colleges are also critical. We have over 75 community colleges in the United States that offer an associate's degree in geography. Not only are most undergraduates enrolled in public two-year institutions, but undergraduates from poorer backgrounds are much more likely to attend community colleges. African Americans, Native Americans, and Latinos also show higher representation in two-year colleges. Beyond community colleges, we should be looking at historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, Hispanic-serving institutions, as well as tribal colleges. These too are intrinsic aspects of our geographic universe. As we welcome geographers from all over the world, from all kinds of institutional backgrounds, we also expand our demographic diversity. Now, standalone geographers keep geography going in many different places, even in some states where geography does not otherwise exist. Especially with the waves and mergers and closures of geography departments, we may see that there are more geographers working in colleges where they alone bring geographic knowledge to students and lay the groundwork for, hopefully in the future, building up entire geographic opportunities and geographic programs. Now, the AAG has recognized institutional diversity in some very key ways. There are affinity groups for standalone geographers, for community college professors. There's a Program Excellence Award that was won this year by Sinclair Community College with an honorable mention to Grand Rapids Community College, and the importance of this will be emphasized after my talk. There are special travel grants in an effort to diversify AAG committees. But as with all aspects of increasing diversity, this is a work in progress. This is a continuous challenge. I was really glad to see my friend Mark Barnes elected to the AAG Council as a standalone geographer at Morgan State and HBCU. And in fact, my very first doctoral student, Peter Mariah, is the lone geographer at Howard University, perhaps the flagship HBCU. I'd love to see this sort of representation, especially in institutions that would not otherwise have geography. But we need to grow geography. We need to grow it at these HBCUs. We need to grow it at these Hispanic-serving institutions. We need to grow it at community colleges and everywhere that we can find any opportunity. Now, I would say this, the AAG awards, especially the awards that include the class of fellows, should make a much more concerted effort to include geographers who are not at doctoral granting institutions. Institutional diversity should always be considered in the composition of all aspects of what the AAG does. It should be considered in the composition of editorial boards in AAG journals. Last time I checked, while professors who teach at non-PhD programs make up well over 50% of the membership, they represent only 20% of AAG editorial boards. We need to show how we value geographers at all institutions by our representations and by our actions. Another way to expand our community lies in reaching out beyond the academy. Now, many professors are inculcated in the aspirational goals of a tenure-track job. Graduate school is viewed as a kind of apprentice to the singular vocation. Now, we advisors are remarkably good at instilling geographical skills in our students. We're probably not nearly as good at showing them how to go beyond the world of colleges and universities, and my advisees can probably attest to that. Many of us, we march straight into academic jobs after earning our PhD. University life is really all we know. But most of our students won't go into academic careers. Most talented undergraduates find themselves in the workforce right after college, and our job should be to get them the right job. Now, most of our master's students are not simply practicing to be PhD students. Many want to use their additional geographical knowledge to find meaningful work in private businesses and government agencies and nonprofits, or even in K-12 education. And the PhD itself, the final degree on the academic ladder, is not just training for the professoriate. It's well known that there are twice as many PhD recipients as there are academic jobs. In geography, we do place a higher proportion of our PhD students in academic positions, but still the number of university jobs is far below the number of PhDs granted. Now, non-academic jobs are just as valuable as academic jobs. First of all, these jobs usually pay a lot better, and the level of job satisfaction can be a lot higher. Non-academic positions represent interesting challenges, stimulating colleagues, and more real-world accomplishments. Such jobs also have a big advantage in bringing much more geographical flexibility, maybe allowing people to live with their partners, to stay in a place that they like, and to not follow the holy academic grail across the country and the world. Now, I will say this, I think the need for PhD level training will continue to grow, even if the number of professor slots remains or grows stagnant. I don't believe that we produce too many PhD students in geography. We just need to open up to them a wider world of possibilities and lose the academia first mentality. Geography not only gives students the human and technical skills predicted to be more valuable, it synthesizes these skills. Past President Sarah Bednarz has described geography's secret powers as the thinking that harnesses spatial concepts, spatial representations, and reasoning, as well as applies this knowledge to various geospatial technologies. These powers can be used throughout the workforce, bringing the value of geography to everybody. Now, we probably know this in our hearts, but we need to do a better job at communicating this in our associations. Beginning with students, finding ways to help those looking for a non-academic job would be a start. Now, I was delighted to see that the AAG is offering 2 workshops tomorrow for those thinking of working in the public sector or in the private sector. From here, the challenge is how can we hold these geographers and keep them within our community? Now, I do recognize that attending a meeting is more difficult for geographers who did not go into academia. The incentives aren't always there. So it behooves the geography associations to create more incentives, to open themselves up in places, and as places where geographers outside the academy can make connections and to get a lot of useful information. And I appreciate several specialty groups, including the business specialty group, the applied specialty group, and the public-private affinity group for promoting the non-academic world. But the fact remains that less than 11% of our members come from outside higher education. Data from a consulting group show that AAG members in non-academic jobs were far less likely to attend the annual meeting, and for those who did attend, they attended less frequently. Now, if we confine our appeal to academic-bound geographers only, if we become the American Association of Academic Geographers only, we risk limiting the reach of the AAG and cramping the opportunities for current AAG members. The second scale is in what we can do to build up community within our own workplaces. How do we try to broaden community at the departmental level? Well, first of all, I think we need to understand that for many, the college world is filled with implicit rules and mores that many do not necessarily understand. Now, in his address, Ken talked about something that I thought was very valuable. He talked about making the implicit explicit, and I agree with that entirely. There are several groups that are initially left out of the club, those who did not receive the cultural memo, so to speak, right? But I would like to talk specifically about first-generation students. These are those students whose parents did not go to colleges and who may have scant understanding of what college entails. These are the types of students who may not know how to approach a professor, who may find themselves without great study habits, or who may feel kind of intimidated in the classroom. Now, I know that most of us in this room probably feel this explicitly. Of course we want to help students. Everybody does. But how best do you practice this? I think we need to think of the experience through the eyes of these students. And I would say, how available are you? How do you make sure and respond to emails? I know so many students who email a professor and they just never hear back. The professor never gets back to them. And I'll say, email them again. But for many first-generation students, they're simply too intimidated to do that. I would say to you too, how much do you focus on the teaching and mentoring aspects of your job? Even at R1 institutions, teaching should come first. It's essential for us to have a special sensitivity to those less familiar with what a college education entails. Bringing those not as comfortable with college life into our community is one of the best things we can do. It is the compassionate thing to do, but it's also a wise thing to do for the sake of the discipline. In my experience, geography often thrives in universities because we're known as the department with the most accessible and helpful professors. Building community for these students, these potential geographers, aligns our moral code with practical interest. For a long time, geography as its own field of study was nearly impossible to find in American high schools. As I said, it was just very, very rare. With a few exceptions, geography would be folded in such wonderful subjects as earth sciences, or nothing against earth sciences, but still, that was geography, or history, or what's the other, social studies, and there were probably a bunch of other things. I never had a high school geography course. Neither did my kids. Now, advanced placement in human geography has changed all of this. For those of you who don't know, advanced placement courses allow high school students to gain college credit in a particular subject. Now, AP Human Geography was developed in the 1990s by several people, including Alec Murphy and the late Don Ziegler. Since then, it has become one of the top 10 most popular AP subjects. AP Human Geography stands alone, prospering in schools across the country. Now, given the spectacular growth in AP Human Geography, we would hope, expect, maybe a similar trajectory for the number of geography majors with maybe a 5 or 7 year lag. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. The number of geography majors has remained flat and even declined, even as the number of successful AP Human Geography test takers has exploded. Now, it makes sense for us to understand the reasons why and to try to correct these. Now, I know that one concern that I've heard expressed about AP Human Geography is that it cannibalizes existing college geography courses. Incoming students may no longer need human geography as part of their distribution requirements because they've already had it in high school. This might be true in some instances, but I think a larger issue is probably that most students take AP Human Geography in the 9th grade. Because they take it so young, far younger than students in other AP courses, they're more removed from entering college. So what can we do about it? What can we as geographers do about it to correct that imbalance? I suggest that we have to work to expand the community at the disciplinary level and at the local level. Bringing more AP Human Geography teachers into the wider geographical community is one place to start. Now, I'm a counselor of the American Geographical Society, and we invite a number of teachers to the annual symposium every year in New York. It's a wonderful thing, and they appreciate it a great deal. The AAG has also initiated meetings at the national conference, which could also be continued at regional conferences. Beyond these initiatives, I propose taking steps at a smaller level. All geography departments are situated among numerous high schools, several of which probably teach AP Human Geography. The high school closest to me initiated an AP Human Geography course 6 years ago, and it is quite possible, but I'm ashamed to say that the link between this high school and our geography department at Kent State does not yet exist. Now, we could expand community by forging more connections between the AP Human Geography teachers, the students in their classes, and our departments. Perhaps we could invite teachers and students to come over for our Geography Awareness Days, or ask if you can go ahead and talk to their class about what a geography degree has to offer. I know this is more work, but I think this is vital work. Programs to connect human geography high school teachers with geography departments from local colleges and universities could be institutionalized. And since many colleges and universities actually gain many of their students from neighboring communities, this early intervention could yield benefits further on down the line. Another option is to find students who are already at your institution who have completed AP Human Geography courses. Invite them to come to departmental events while they're still freshmen and sophomores, right? And consider giving them information about becoming a major or a minor. These might all seem like small steps, but I think they could yield very, very big dividends. Now, it can't escape any of us that we're here at the first AAG national meeting in 4 years. I remember all too well, in 2020, 3 years ago, Gary and I deciding that we needed to cancel the 2020 Denver meeting and trying to figure out what all this would mean. Little did we know that we would not get back in person for 4 long years. Now, coming back to this conference has been truly fantastic for me, and I hope it's been great for you too. To reestablish bonds with so many of my colleagues, to meet up with old friends, to get to meet a whole lot of new people, and to talk in front of live audiences, to see people's reactions instead of a black box and a microphone on mute. That's great. I do realize that one can have community in a virtual space, but to me, a physical community, whether it be a group of colleagues, a classroom, a research team, or a conference just like this, is enormously valuable. I'm grateful that many smaller meetings have taken place in the last 1.5 years, but I will say this one is the biggest and the best of them all. Every time I come to an AAG meeting, I realize that it's just more than a bunch of people interested in spatial relations and human-environment interactions and the significance and meaning of places and landscapes and the dynamics of various Earth processes. This meeting reaffirms that geography is a true community made up of people communicating, collaborating, and convening at various points in time. While I'm excited to be past the pandemic, my concern, as expressed, is that the community of geography is getting a little bit smaller, a little bit frailer. Even before the pandemic, the hearty confidence of the early 2000s had dissipated somewhat. The numbers were not growing in the direction that we would like to see. But now geography is back. We are back. We have big challenges, but we also have one big asset. We know that geography is the discipline well-positioned to meet the problems of today and to provide our students with a strong preparation for tomorrow. We are back because we know geography's value, but how well do we communicate that value? We are back because we know the importance of our geographical community, but how much do we want to expand this geography community? We are back because we know that inclusion is a worthwhile endeavor. And my humble suggestion is that we need to broaden the community of geography by broadening the population of geographers within the community. Now, I've outlined 4 distinct ways in which we could do this at scales large and small. Surely there are others, and I'm eager to hear some of the suggestions that you may have. The trick is, we need to try. We absolutely must expand the community of geography if we're going to have any hope for geography surviving in the coming decades. I, for one, would like to see the community of geography thrive. I firmly believe that it will. Thank you. Well, the next part of this program, and I'm unfortunately not going to have time for questions, but I would love to talk to each of you individually. You'll see me in the halls, probably too much in the halls, and that's okay. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. But I do want to present our Presidential Achievement Awards. And I want to make a few remarks first, and then I will present the Presidential Achievement Awards to our 2 distinguished awardees. I think for me, these Presidential Achievement Awards mark a departure of sorts from the traditional honorees. As I've said, geography is a discipline and thrive only if we honor those at the front lines of education who are responsible for educating and nurturing potential geographers from the very beginning. To that end, I would like to bestow this year's Presidential Achievement Awards on 2 extraordinary individuals who have devoted most of their academic career to service in community colleges. So I'm going to first bring up Jackie Housel. I'm going to say a few words first, and then I'll bring you up, but I want you to be recognized. There are many opportunities found in a community college education, and Jackie has demonstrated these as a teacher, a mentor, and as an advocate. Jackie has spent most of her career at Sinclair Community College near Dayton, Ohio, where she's taught students the value of a geographical perspective, many of whom have gone on to spread geography themselves. Jackie's graduate work examined racialized patterns in urban areas. As a professor, she continued to publish on the role of race and refugees in journals like Urban Studies, Urban Geography, and Social and Cultural Geography. But her more recent work, which has shown up in outlets like The Professional Geographer, has focused more on documenting the roles and challenges inherent in community colleges. In these pieces, Jackie shows how pivotal 2-year colleges are in shaping future geographers, and how community college professors and standalone geographers need to forge collaborations to maximize their impact on the curriculum. Jackie has consistently advocated for the inclusion of community college professors in the academy, and especially in organizations such as the AAG. She was the first community college professor to lead the East Lakes division of the AAG. She led the standalone Geographers community group and the community college affinity groups, and has worked on establishing an APGIS program, and now serves on the AAG Healthy Departments Committee. Jackie also engages with the community by improving police-neighborhood relations and in educating her neighbors on local immigrants and refugees. So I would like to bring up Jackie Housel to accept this award. And here is this, and here is this. We got a nice, nice thing. So, thank you, Jackie, for everything that you've done.
Thank you.
Now, after a career in the military and in the Merchant Marines, Mike DeVivo began a new life as a geographer. Since then, he has defined the value of the community college as a nurturing ground for new geography students by single-handedly managing the geography program at Grand Rapids Community College. And I can say that as a graduate advisor, 2 of his advisees have actually come and ended up working with me. In his 30 years as an instructor, Mike has turned many students into geographers, several of whom have gone on to careers in the field. Beyond teaching and advising, Mike has chronicled the field of geography. His book, Leadership in American Academic Geography, the 20th Century, looked at how geography chairs made a difference in the success in many prominent geography departments. He also has a Conversations with a Geographer oral series that enables us to hear from many of these leaders directly. Mike has also reflected on the role of geographers in community colleges, many of whom are also standalone geographers in their institutions. Mike maintains a steady involvement with the AAG and with higher education in general. He serves on the Healthy Departments Committee. He's active in the International Geographic Union Commissions on History of Geography and the Commission on African Studies, and he has long demonstrated a passion for the field, which is typified by Mike's unique motto, Geography Lives. So I'd like to bring up Mike DeVivo to accept this award.
Thank you.
And also, hold this.
Okay.
You want to have this. And there you go.
Whoop.
There
we go.
All right. So I want to just join me in thanking both of these extraordinary individuals for enriching the field of geography in terms of what they do. And let me again thank you for coming to this talk and to the presentations. I hope to talk to you later on, all of you. Take care. Bye-bye.